Hi there, this is Phil with PhilFX. Got another tutorial. Today we're going to talk about working with curves, a little bit about curves, editing them, and uh, touch on working with how you use curves, in particular with using a revolve, a loft, and an extrude. So let's go ahead and get started. To do this, I want to get rid of this gradient background because actually curves will show up a lot better if we can lighten this up. The way you do that in Maya is if you just hit Option or Alt B, you can toggle through the various background schemes, and this with this light background scheme, it'll look a lot better when we're editing. So normally when I edit curves, I want to be in one of the orthogonal cameras. So let's go ahead and we're going to go into the front camera view, and there's a number of different types of curves that you can work with and generate in Maya. To get the curve menu, you can there's actually a tab bar up here on the shelf for that, but actually to get a little more detail on what the options are, you want to use the surface menu option, and let's go into create, and let me just tear this off. And we have basically four different kinds of curves. There's what's called a CV curve, an EP curve, a Bezier curve, which if you're familiar with Photoshop and Illustrator, you're already familiar with that, and a pencil curve. So the CV curve and the EP curve are basically the same kind. The only difference between these two is in an EP curve, where you put down the points is exactly where your line is. And in the CV curve, where you put down the points is not where your line is. And I will show you the difference between those two. So let's start with the CV curve. And let me click on here so we can see some of the options. And if we reset the tool, this normally comes up, and you have the options for a linear. In the curve degree, there's 1 for linear, 2, 3 is cubic, there's a 3 Bezier, 5 and 7. So what does that mean? What this means is if I put down a curve and I have it in one linear, then every place I put a point, it's essentially making straight segments. So if you are trying to model something and you want straight segments, you want to put that in that mode, and that will give you straight segment lines. Let me delete that. Let's open this up again. And if we go to the default, which is cubic, now when we put this in, I put down these lines, and you see that on the third line from the start, here is the start of my curve. You can see that white line is the curve, and this is the CV. Remember I said with the CV curve, where you put down the points is not where the line is, and you can see that right off the bat. And then I just continue to put down points, and I can draw this curve. And when I get to the end of what I want, I just hit return, and there is my curve. And so you can see the curve in space. If we flip and go to a perspective view, it's truly currently a two-dimensional curve. Okay, and at the moment it's in the XY plane. If we need to modify that curve, I can go in and right click on it, and you can modify. The typical way to modify it is with the control vertices. So you can see the control vertexes. A couple of things about these right off the bat. If we zoom up here, this is where I started. So I started with my first point was right here. This little U that you see is actually a control vertex, but it has a U there because it's telling you the direction of the curve. Curves have direction. They have a beginning and they have an end. So this U is at the beginning of the curve. So the curve started here and came around, and it ended over here. I can select any one of these points, and now I can do a translate all of them. With curves, the only thing that you can do is you can translate. Doing a rotation on a point doesn't make any sense, and doing a scaling on a point doesn't make any sense. So you can only do translation, so we can take that point and I can translate that. And I can truly translate that in 3 dimensions. So here I'm still moving it in the XY plane, but if I wanted to, I can modify this and I can move things in the Z plane. And so I can take this curve and I can pretty much bend this a whole lot in space. All right. So then we go back to object mode, and we now see this curve is translating through three-dimensional space. And you ask, well, why would you do that? Well, one of the things right off the mind comes to hand is if you have something and you have an object and you want to have that object animate through space and have it follow a path. This is probably the most convenient way that people do this, is you create the path through space and then you attach that object to this curve, and the object will follow this curve in its animation and going through space. And it allows you a very easy way of doing an animation in a controlled environment, so you don't have to go in and try and guess at where keyframes are. By having a path there, it's something that you can always go in and you can modify. So let me go back to our front, and we did a CV curve. So let's look at an EP curve. And an EP curve has basically the same kind of degrees when you set it up. But the difference being here is we'll put some clicks down, and now you can see the curve that I'm generating on the EP is exactly where I put the points down. As opposed to when I did that CV curve, you saw that where I put down the points was not where the curve was. Let's just rehash that again so you can see that. So we go in here with a CV curve. There you can see that line where this is where the curve actually is, but it truly is not exactly where I'm clicking. All right. Once the curves are done though, and you look at these, if we look at the control vertices on a CV curve, you can see what those look like. If I get the control vertexes on an EP curve, they're very similar. They're a little bit close, but they're still the control vertices are not exactly right on the line. You still have the same beginning and end. So here's this beginning of the EP curve, and if we go over here and select this guy, this is the beginning of the CV curve. And so from that respect, they're both identical. Let me just delete that. So let's go in and let's look at a Bezier curve. So if you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator and you worked with Bezier curves before, this should be quite familiar to you. We open this up, and there's a number of hotkeys. It's nice that they put these here for you. I won't belabor these, but there you have quite a bit of control with the Bezier curve. And in fact, there's a number of you can create very complicated curves that you have a lot of control over because you have the Bezier handle. Like Photoshop or Illustrator, when you put down the curve, if you just click points, it just creates a curve, but there's no Bezier handles there. If I click and drag, then I pull those handles out. Okay, so you can see me pulling those handles out. And if I finish with the curve, I hit return. Now it's done. And so if we come back in and you say, okay, that's great, but I really messed up because I really wanted to put control handles on here. Well, it's very simple to do. You just select that point, you hold down Shift, and you right mouse button click and you say Bezier, and boom, that puts the handles in there. So we can go in here and I can put the handles on all of these points that I initially didn't put points on. And again, like I said, in if you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator, I can go in and I can grab this point and I can pull it out. I can go in and grab a handle and I can pull the handle in, pull the handle out. I can move it around. Allows you to do some very nice curve fitting, as you would expect with a Bezier curve. One thing to note, both with the EP, the CV, and the Bezier curve, I've defined actually fairly complicated shapes, and I've been able to do that with a very few number of control points. I bring that out because the last curve method of drawing a curve I want to show you is using the pencil tool. And I honestly can't say that I ever have used the pencil tool, and the reason in particular is, let's go ahead and we'll take a look at that. There's not a whole lot of options with the pencil tool, but you basically just click and drag. So I'm clicking and dragging and I'm just drawing. And so I've made a line with my pencil tool, and it's followed where I've put that pencil tip pretty religiously. In fact, it's followed it exactly. The difficulty comes in now that if I want to edit this line that I've drawn with the pencil tool, and we go in here and look at our control vertices, lo and behold, boy do I have a mess here. You end up generating lots and lots of points. And as long as you don't want to edit this line and you really are looking for a curve that's free form, this probably is maybe what you want to do. But the minute you want to try and edit something like this, when you have so many control points in here, it becomes quite a challenge to try and make adjustments. If I want to pull this out, I have to go in and selectively grab a couple of points, and then grab a few more points, grab a few less points. There's probably some games that I can play with soft selection to help me out with that. But even still, manipulating so many control points on a curve becomes quite problematic. So the pencil curve is really not something, you just need to understand what it does for you and what it doesn't do. And like I said, it may be what you want, but it's not something that I use. So how would you want to, what's another way of utilizing these curves? Well, let's go in, and I have brought in an image of a bourbon glass. All right, thanks to the internet, I just went out and just grabbed myself an image, and I tried to get something as close to a orthogonal straight-on shot as I could get. And this is pretty close. If we go in here and let's look at our front view and bring this in, you can see I have this pretty much centered, and I would like to model this bourbon glass in Maya. One of the simplest ways to do something like this, because you have a shape that is symmetric about one axis. It's actually, in fact, it's actually symmetric about two axes, is you create a profile, and then using one of the NURBS tools, curve tools, is you do a revolve of that profile. And in revolving that profile, you create the glass. So let's go in and go ahead and we'll duplicate this glass. Now, I said you can use the CV curve or you can use the EP curve. In this case, I want to duplicate these edges pretty close, so I'm going to go ahead and select the EP curve tool. And for my first point and my last point, because I have my glass pretty much centered right on the center point here, I really want to snap to a grid, but which is my center line. But for the rest of my points, I don't want to do that. So a quick hotkey to do that is if you hold on the X key, look over here. I'm just toggling X and not X. And when you hold on the X key, this will snap to a grid. So my first point, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to snap to a grid, so I'll put that down. Then I release the X key, and I'm going to put a point here and a point here. And you can see a little bit that this truly is not a completely orthogonal view. There's a little bit of perspective to this base. But what I can do is I'm going to put some points down, and I'm going to approximate what this would probably be if it was exactly orthogonal, and then we can come back and we can edit some of these points. So I'm just going to follow this up, and we'll put this in. Let's zoom this in just a little bit so we get a little more closer to the detail. And I'm not going to be too worried about it because I'm going to come back. Going around this top, I want to put in a couple of points. And then we're going to come back down. And this is a rather thin-walled glass. Like I said, I'm going to edit this when we get it completed. Now I'm going to put one point here. Now here's my last point, and I want to make this snap to a grid. So I hold down the X and I click that, and it snaps to a grid point. And don't worry about the fact that it fell down there. What's important is it snapped to the grid in the X dimension. So we're done with that. We hit return, and there is our approximation of the profile of this glass. So let's go in and we can get our control vertices and we can edit this. And let's see, I've got an extra point in there. I probably don't want that, so I can just select that and delete it. I'm going to take this one and I'm just going to pull this up in this axis. So that looks about right. Take this and pull that down just a little bit. And again, like I tell my students, this is not CAD, this is art. So I want to get close, but I'm not too worried about the fact that it's not absolutely perfect. I'm not going to try and mill something out on a CNC machine. And you can see some of the difficulties with the points that I have up here. Getting around this corner is a little difficult. I purposely put in some extra points so we can have this get around the corner. And take all of these, pull that down just a little bit. Maybe push that in there. Alright. So basically you can see what I'm doing. I'm just slowly moving points along until I get a profile that pretty much matches what I'm looking for. We got a little bit of work on this stem here, so let's take this over and pull this up. Take this and pull that over. And you can see with these control vertices, you actually have a fair degree of control that I can take these things. Actually, let me take quite a few of these. Pull these up, maybe over. There we go. And I'm going to take that one, and I'm actually going to pull this down a little bit more because this actually gets a little flatter. This is we got quite a bad perspective shift right here at this bottom. And so let me pull this down a little bit. Maybe pull that one down and up just a touch. I don't like that bump there. Okay. So I think that looks pretty good. So if we select this, go out, that's a pretty close approximation to what I'm looking for. So now if we go out here, we have this profile of our glass, and I don't need the glass anymore, so I can hide that. And I have this curve. So how do we make a glass out of that? Well, it's really quite simple. We go into surfaces and go into the surface menu, and we have this command called revolve. So if we open this up, let's reset it till we get to the default settings, and you can pick an axis with which you want to revolve. So I can revolve around the X, the Y, or the Z axis. I actually have a starting point and an ending point. The default is it starts at 0 and it sweeps a full 360 degrees. So what it's going to do is it's going to take this shape and it's going to sweep it around 360 degrees. At the moment it's set to produce 8 segments in terms of resolution, which for what I'm looking for is fine. Note here though, this is actually quite nice. I can have the output geometry be NURBS, I can have it be polygons, or a Bezier. So if I went to polygons, you even have a few more options here. So I can decide if I want triangles or if I want quads. I can set the resolution. I can do the resolution just in general, or I can actually put a count to the number of quads that we have in there. So you've got quite a bit of control if you output to polygons. At the moment, for this exercise, let's just output to NURBS. 8's fine, so I'm just going to go ahead. And the way that this control box works, if I hit revolve, it will revolve this shape and then close this box. Actually, I want to show you just a couple of quick things here. So we're going to revolve around the y-axis, and if I just hit apply, there's our glass. So we very rapidly, with very little work, made a extremely nice model of a bourbon glass. If I hit an undo, and just to be silly, if we decided to revolve this around the x-axis as opposed to the y-axis, and I apply that, you can see that we get, Lord knows what that is. It looks like some kind of a bizarre mathematical function. It certainly isn't a glass, but you can see that it took that shape that is the profile, and true to form, it revolved it around the x-axis. If we undo that, get back to where we were, and you actually can revolve it around the z-axis. The z-axis always, well, depending on two of the axes will give you a shape. The third axis is just going to give you something ridiculous, and that's what that is, because it's all in one plane. So let's go back, we'll get our bourbon glass and apply that, and so there we have it. And it gives you, like I said, a very quick way to model something. You can get it as NURBS, you can get it as a polygon, but it does a very excellent job. So you can model glasses or shapes like this that basically they're symmetrical in 2 dimensions. The first way that you want to approach trying to do model really is working with a curve. So let's show you just a couple more things real quick of things that we can do with curves. I'm going to delete that, and I'm actually going to delete that. And let's get back into my 2-dimensional view here. And just real quick, I'm just going to generate a quick curve. Hit return. Go into 3D space here. And so I have this curve that's this shape, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to generate a small circle. Okay, so now I have what's a profile, in this case is a circle, and I have a path. And you would do this if you are trying to model a pipe or some kind of cylindrical beaming. At the moment I have this being circular. I can actually make a square. You saw that with CV curves I can actually create kind of a bizarre closed shape that would be straight lines and curves and things like that. Bottom line is you essentially you just need a profile and a path. So I have a profile and a path, and we have this tool up here called extrude. And extruding on NURB curves is just like extruding with polygons. We did that before in a previous tutorial. So if I select the profile first and I shift select the path second, and let me call up the extrude here, and I'll reset to how this comes up. This is normally how this tool comes up, at the profile and closest end to the point. If I go ahead and hit apply, it gives me kind of a bizarre pipe. It starts at the point and it's following the shape, but it really isn't making the pipe true to form. There are reasons for wanting to have those kind of selections. Making a pipe is not one of them. I kind of find it interesting that Autodesk has chosen these two to be the default, because most of the times that at least I use this tool, I'm trying to make exactly something a pipe, and the way that you do that is you essentially want a straight line down here. You want a tube, you want it at the path component, and you want the profile normal. So if we apply that, bingo, here is our pipe, and it follows true to form. And so we have made a pipe and it follows that center line. Now the thing that's very nice and quite cool about this is as long as we have not taken this extruded surface and deleted history, the curve that I used that's inside there, if I take this and let me do a Control H just to hide it real quick, and I select this curve and I get control vertices and I move those vertices. Now let's put some gyrations here and back to object mode, and let's go grab that pipe that I hid and show it again. You can see that I can modify that. So by modifying the path, I can modify that extrusion. And like I said, as long as I don't delete history on this surface, you have the ability to do that. As soon as I delete history, which the way you do that is I have this selected, so I go up to Edit, Delete by Type, History. So now I've deleted history on that extruded surface. If I hide that again, let's select the curve, get our control vertices, take that and swing this back this way. And now I take this, Shift H. You can see, okay, I modified that curve and it did nothing to the old pipe. That's because we deleted history. We essentially disconnected this curve from this pipe that we had made. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. But it's, again, using the NURB curves and creating a centerline path and a profile. You can quickly essentially extrude piping, ropes, anything like that, and it's a very, very fast way of modeling. So get back here. I'm going to generate some curves again. Hit return. Now what I want to do, so I have this one curve, and let me put this over here, and I'm going to duplicate this curve a number of times. So I'd hit Command D, I duplicate that, and let me slide it. Command D, duplicate that, and slide it. Command D, duplicate that, slide it. So now I have 4 identical curves. And because it's boring just to do everything the same, I'm going to go in and let me modify each one of those curves just a little bit. So we can take this and pull this up and pull those points down. Go to this curve and take that point and pull that in. Take these points and push those down. Take this curve and take that one and push it way down. And maybe take that one, bring that point up, select this last curve, and we'll just muck around with the points just a little bit. Alright, so I have 4 curves here that are in space, and we're going to use a command called loft. And what lofting does is it's going to map a surface across these 4 curves and create a fairly irregular surface. Now, lofting is actually quite common in the CAD industry when you're trying to design something like the hull of a ship or the wing end of an aircraft. Typically what they have is they have numerous cross sections that go all the way down. If you think of taking the hull of a boat and slicing it like a loaf of bread, you have each of those cross sections, and the cross sections would be these curves, and then you loft a surface across the outside of the curves, and that's what makes that nice smooth curve for the ship. So let's go ahead and do a loft, and I'm just going to do it real quick, and I select my curves, and I did a selection by dragging across, and I'm going to show something. So the selection order is important, but let's go ahead. Not a whole lot of options with this. Let's just go ahead and hit apply, and boom, you can see the surface that this creates. Okay, so it creates a very interesting surface. Alright, actually I created this upside down. You see it's dark on that side and it's light on this side. It has to do with where I started and where I ended. But you have quite an irregular surface, and it's all defined by those curves. Alright, same kind of thing, that if I went in, and because I have not deleted history on this lofted surface, I can actually go back and change those curves, and as I change those curves, I would change this surface. Let me undo what I did here in lofting the surface, and let's go back here, and I'm going to purposely go in and I'm going to pick this curve, and then I shift select that curve, shift select this one, and then I shift select this curve. Maya actually does remember the order in which I selected these. And now if I try and do that loft command, what you end up is a real mess. What Maya is attempting to do is it started here, because that's where I said start, then it jumped to the third curve over and mapped to that surface, then it jumped back here to this curve to map that, then it jumped to the last one. So you've got basically a terrible surface because this is all mapped onto itself, and you really wouldn't want to do that, but I wanted to demonstrate that the selection order is important. So if we stop that again, and I selected this way, what I really want to do is select it that way. So actually let me select this one, and then this, and then this, and we loft that, and now we have a nice surface, and I have the top on the top and the underneath side is underneath. And but you can see how you can create very irregular surfaces. You just create some profiles, and you really do it quite rapidly. And so again, this is a very powerful tool. The lofting tool is something I use in modeling. If you want to create some irregular shapes, you can do it very fast, and it works quite well. So we did revolve, we did loft, and we did extrude. The planar that's over here, basically if I go in, let me delete this, and let's go in here. If we create a shape, and I get close, and I want to close this shape, the way you do that is you put it in object mode, and you go to edit curves, and you go right here to open close curves. So I close the curve, and now the curve is closed. So now I have a closed shape. So if we then go into here, I can go in, and with a closed shape, if I use the planar command, what the planar command is going to do is it's just going to fill this closed shape in with the surface. So I apply this, and now I have a closed surface. And you can change the resolution and things like that, but basically you now have a closed surface. So if you have a regular shape and you want to then close that in, using the planar command in the curves will allow you to do that. So hopefully this will help you out. We covered curves, EP curves, CV curves, Bezier, and pencil. And we reviewed just a quick review on using revolve, a loft, an extrude, and the planar command. So hopefully this will help you out in class. This is Phil with PhilFX. Catch you later.